You have any idea how much of a joke of a comment this is? I don't know how you consider a man who dedicated his life, gave his life, sacrificed his two sons to try and end slavery, how you can sit there and claim that he was a racist. Seriously. But let's not listen to me talk about why John Brown wasn't a racist. Let's use the words of Frederick Douglass. But it was Brown's impassioned words that made the biggest mark as he spoke of a plan to free the enslaved and squirrel them to their freedom through the Allegheny, however you say that, mountains. His measured response to Douglas' question showed he had given the matter careful thought, talking about the raid of Harper's Ferry. Armed men would be stationed at strategic checkpoints. Why? Because he helped plan this with Harriet Tubman, because she knew the layout of the land. He explained from where they would slip down to the towns to rally the enslaved and acquire provisions, and even if authorities managed to corner them, what better way to die than for such a noble cause? Douglas was more of a proponent of William Lloyd Garrison, the man I mentioned on the video that you're commenting on. He was more of a fan of his non-resistance form of abolition, but he began to reassess his beliefs after the night at Brown's home. While I continued to write and speak against slavery, I became all the same less hopeful of its peaceful abolition. My utterances became more and more tinged by the color of this man's strong impressions. By the mid-1850s, Brown had become a national figure in his own right for his involvement in the violent bleeding Kansas border conflicts, which I discussed briefly in the video that you're commenting on. His actions celebrated by those who felt that slavery would only end through bloodshed. I met him often during the struggle, Douglas wrote. All I saw of him gave me more favorable impression of the man and inspired me with a higher respect for his character. Does that sound like a racist to you? But Frederick Douglass refused to join Brown because he thought it was a suicide mission. Brown and Douglas met for the final time at a quarry near Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, in August 1859. This time, Brown presented the full scope of his plan to capture Federal army at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, and arm the enslaved for a major insurrection. In Douglas' recollection, Brown brushed off the warning that he was going into a perfect steel trap from which he would never get out alive, and pressed forward with the attempt to recruit his friend. And Frederick Douglass writes, whether it was due to my discretion or my cowardice, Douglass wrote, he declined to join what became the ill-fated Harper's Ferry raid in 1859. Nearly every member of the siding party was either captured or unalived, and Brown was hanged on December 2nd. And after this event, Frederick Douglass gave one of his famous speeches talking about John Brown. But the question is, did John Brown fail? He certainly did fail to get off Harper's Ferry before being beaten down by the United States soldiers. He did fail to save his own life and to lead a liberating army into the mountains of Virginia, but he did not go to Harper's Ferry to save his life. The true question is, did John Brown draw his sword against slavery and thereby lose his life in vain? And I answer to this 10,000 times no. No man fails or can fail who so grandly gives himself and all he has to a righteous cause. No man who was in his hour of extremest need, when on his way to meet his death, could so forget himself as to stop and kiss a little child, one of the hated race for whom he was about to die, could by any possibility fail. This guy knew he was going on a suicide mission. On the way there, he took the time to stop and kiss a black child. Does that sound like a racist to you? If John Brown did not end the war that ended slavery, he did at least begin the war that ended slavery. If we took over the dates, or if we look over the dates, places of men for which this honor is claimed, we shall find that not Carolina, but Virginia, not Fort Sumter, but Harper's Ferry and the Arsenal, not Colonel Anderson, but John Brown began the war that ended American slavery and made this a free republic. Until this blow was struck, the prospect for freedom was dim, shadowy, and uncertain. The irrepressible conflict was one of words, votes, and compromises. And he finished off his speech with, when John Brown stretched forth his arm, the sky was clear. The time for compromise was gone. The armed host of freedom stood face to face over the chasm of a broken union, and the clash of arms was at hand. The South staked all upon getting possession of the federal government, and failing to do that, drew the sword of rebellion and thus made her own, and not Brown's, the lost cause of the century. And John Brown had a deep admiration and respect for Harriet Tubman. In fact, when they met in 1858, Brown, awestruck at meeting Tubman, dubbed her General Tubman and referred to her as one of the best and bravest persons on the planet. Does that sound like a racist to you? And Harriet Tubman said of John Brown, he done more in dying than 100 men would in living. How could you possibly consider someone that dedicated and gave his life to ending slavery, who had the deepest, most admiration, and full respect by two of America's most iconic figures when it came to the 1800s and abolition. Put some respect on this fucking guy's name.